September 1918, France. Captain John McCloy of the Motor Transport Corps stood at the edge of a dirt road, gazing at something Europe had never witnessed. In the pre-dawn darkness, an unbroken chain of headlights stretched toward the horizon. Thousands of Liberty trucks, Pierce Arrows, and Packards, loaded with shells, provisions, fuel, and fresh troops. This wasn't a convoy. This was the mechanical pulse of an advancing army. 60 kilometers of continuous steel and rubber flowing toward the front lines at 20 miles per hour. Where Europeans saw horse-drawn wagons and overloaded railways, the Americans had built something else entirely: a highway of war. In a few hours, the Meuse-Argonne offensive would begin, the largest battle in American military history. 600,000 soldiers would press against 40 kilometers of German front. And everything, absolutely everything, depended on whether these trucks could deliver 80,000 tons of supplies within the first 48 hours. The French said, impossible. The British doubted. The Germans never even imagined anyone would attempt to supply an army of this size over dirt roads. But the Germans didn't yet know that the Americans had brought to Europe not just trucks. They had brought the logistics of victory. The decision was made in a Washington conference room in March 1917, 3 weeks before America declared war. Major General William Black spread requisition documents across the table. French requests for horses, tens of thousands of horses. The British Army maintained 591,000 horses on the Western Front, each consuming 20 pounds of feed daily. Black calculated that transporting horse feed required more Atlantic shipping tonnage than ammunition. His counter-proposal was revolutionary. Build an army on wheels, not hooves. The American Expeditionary Forces would become the first fully motorized military force in history. This wasn't efficiency. It was a complete reconception of warfare. European armies remained tethered to railheads and limited by horse endurance. The AEF would move on pneumatic tires across any terrain where roads existed or could be built. General John Pershing embraced the vision immediately. He understood that American industrial capacity represented a strategic weapon Europe could no longer match. In 1917, U.S. factories produced 1,245,792 motor vehicles, more than the rest of the world combined. Ford's assembly lines manufactured complete truck chassis every 40 seconds. This production capacity could be weaponized. The plan was audacious. Ship 50,000 trucks to France within 18 months. Not requisition civilian vehicles, but standardized military designs. The War Department commissioned the Liberty truck, a universal chassis produced by 15 manufacturers using completely interchangeable parts. Every bolt, gasket, and spark plug identical across the entire fleet. A mechanic trained on a Packard could repair a GMC using the same tools and inventory. This mass production philosophy applied to military logistics represented industrial warfare in its purest form. Each Liberty truck carried 3 tons at 15 miles per hour, 3 times faster than horse-drawn wagons. More critically, trucks didn't require rest, food, or veterinary care. They operated continuously in shifts, limited only by fuel and driver endurance. 1 gallon of gasoline moved 1 ton of cargo 20 miles. Moving the same distance with horses required feeding them for 2 days, consuming supplies equivalent to the cargo itself. French officers reviewing these plans expressed polite skepticism. 4 years of trench warfare had taught them that modern combat consumed supplies faster than any system could deliver. The British Passchendaele offensive required 321 trains daily to sustain 3 corps. How could Americans supply a million-man army using vehicles requiring paved roads that didn't exist in the devastated Western Front? What the French didn't grasp was that Americans weren't just bringing trucks. They were importing an entire infrastructure. 30,000 trained mechanics, 15,000 military police as traffic controllers, 800 road construction companies, 400 fuel distribution points, and spare parts sufficient to rebuild the fleet 3 times over. The Motor Transport Corps would grow to 152,000 soldiers, larger than the entire U.S. Standing Army in 1916. This commitment created immediate problems. By June 1918, Liberty truck production ran 6 months behind schedule. Pershing faced a brutal choice: delay offensives or accept non-standardized vehicles. He refused both. Instead, he authorized an emergency purchase. 10,000 civilian trucks bought directly from American dealerships, painted olive drab, and shipped with original parts manuals. The result was organized chaos. Motor pools resembled automotive museums. Dodges beside Whites, Sterlings mixed with Republics. Yet the system functioned. American mechanics proved extraordinarily adaptive, cannibalizing parts, improvising repairs, even forging custom components in mobile machine shops. The decentralized ingenuity that made Ford's assembly lines efficient translated surprisingly well to French mud. By September 1918, the AEF operated 46,697 trucks on French soil. This fleet possessed collective hauling capacity of 140,091 tons, equivalent to 1,400 freight trains or 280,000 horses. Every 24 hours, this mechanical armada could theoretically relocate complete supply requirements for 500,000 soldiers across 50-mile distances. No army in human history had possessed such tactical mobility. The trucks were worthless without roads. This brutal reality became apparent when first American convoys attempted navigating French infrastructure in winter 1917-18. Roads adequate for centuries of horse traffic disintegrated under 3-ton trucks moving in continuous streams. A single Liberty truck exerted ground pressure 8 times greater than horse-drawn wagons. When dozens followed the same path, roads simply ceased to exist. The French had La Voie Sacrée, the sacred road to Verdun. During the 1916 siege, this single highway sustained 500,000 defenders for 10 months. At peak intensity, French military police managed 1 vehicle every 14 seconds, a rate that consumed road surface faster than crews could repair it. By 1918, La Voie Sacrée was less a road than a continuously reconstructed construction site requiring 8,500 laborers working around the clock. The Americans learned a critical lesson. Roads weren't infrastructure. They were consumable resources, like ammunition. High-intensity operations required treating road maintenance as offensive capability. When Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Woods submitted his infrastructure plan in March 1918, French engineers declared it impossible. Woods proposed building 2,400 miles of heavy-duty military roads across the American sector, each sustaining 10,000 tons of traffic daily. Not improving existing roads, wholesale reconstruction using macadam surfaces, crushed rock foundations, and engineered drainage. American road companies proved the French wrong. Drawing on techniques from American railroad and municipal construction, the AEF Engineering Corps established 26 rock quarries, 42 gravel pits, and 18 asphalt plants across eastern France. The Besanvaux quarry alone produced 1,200 tons of crushed stone daily, enough for 3 miles of road weekly. Road construction gangs, many from African-American labor battalions like the 317th Engineers, worked 24-hour shifts at speeds that astonished French observers. The innovation was the roadbed itself. European military roads used compacted dirt reinforced with gravel. Adequate for horses, catastrophic under motors. American engineers designed triple-layer foundations: large stone for structural support, crushed rock for load distribution, fine gravel bound with tar for surface. This methodology, borrowed from American highway engineering, created roads withstanding 500 truck passages daily without degradation. But maintenance under wartime conditions required new organization. The AEF established the Road Patrol Service, highway maintenance combining military police, engineering units, and traffic management. Road patrols operated in zones, each team responsible for 10-mile sectors. They filled potholes, cleared wrecks, directed traffic around damage, and critically, enforced load limits and speed restrictions. Enforcement was rigid and unpopular. Drivers exceeding posted speeds faced court-martial. Overloaded vehicles were impounded. Officers diverting trucks onto unauthorized routes lost commands. Pershing's order was explicit. Roads were more valuable than cargo. Destroying a road for faster delivery was counterproductive if it prevented tomorrow's shipments. This long-term thinking, sacrificing immediate advantage for sustained capability, separated American doctrine from European desperation. The network's test came during Saint-Mihiel in September 1918. Over 4 days, American trucks moved 600,000 troops and 2,700 artillery pieces into positions along a 16-mile front. Tonnage transported exceeded 175,000 tons, more supplies in 96 hours than the British managed in 3 weeks, preparing for the Somme. German intelligence reviewing captured logistics documents expressed disbelief. One report noted American supply columns stretched 40 miles unbroken, moving faster at night than German reinforcements marched during day. The roads held. Despite continuous rain and traffic, macadam surfaces endured. Where French roads dissolved into mud under similar loads, American-built highways remained passable. This wasn't miracle engineering. It was systematic application of industrial-era infrastructure to military problems. The same principles allowing American cities to build streetcar networks, moving millions of commuters, now sustained armies of comparable size in combat. By November 1918, the AEF road network included 1,847 miles of heavy-duty military highways, 3,200 miles of improved secondary roads, and 428 permanent bridges. This infrastructure cost $127 million more than the Panama Canal's lock system. But unlike the canal's 10-year construction, the AAF road network was built in 18 months under hostile fire, in Earth's largest active combat zone. A Liberty truck consumed 1 gallon of gasoline every 8 miles. By October 1918, American trucks burned 80,000 gallons daily, more petroleum than the entire French civilian economy consumed weekly. This fuel had to cross the Atlantic, survive U-boat attacks, unload at French ports, transport to forward depots, and distribute to thousands of vehicles across hundreds of square miles. The AEF's offensive capability depended on a supply chain stretching 3,000 miles from Texas refineries to French battlefields. Standard Oil executives in early 1918 expressed confidence in supplying whatever quantities required. American petroleum production in 1917 reached 335 million barrels, 67% of global output. But production capacity meant nothing if fuel couldn't reach front lines. The bottleneck wasn't wells or refineries. It was transportation infrastructure. French fuel distribution relied on rail transport. Tank cars shipped gasoline from ports to depots, where it transferred to smaller containers hauled forward by horse wagon. This worked for static trench warfare, where positions changed by yards monthly. But American doctrine anticipated mobile warfare, rapid advances covering 10 miles daily. Horse-drawn fuel wagons couldn't keep pace with motorized infantry. Colonel Charles Drake proposed eliminating fixed fuel depots entirely. Instead, create mobile refueling points. Truck-mounted tanks moving with advancing units, establishing temporary stations wherever front lines stabilized. Each fuel truck carried 500 gallons, enough for 16 Liberty trucks. By deploying fuel trucks in pyramidal networks, tanker ships to ports, rail cars to regional hubs, large tank trucks to divisions, small tank trucks to regiments, the AEF could push gasoline forward at advance rates. The system demanded phenomenal coordination. Every fuel truck needed precise orders: which unit, what route, when to arrive. Traffic control managed fuel convoys separately from cargo convoys, using different roads preventing congestion. Refueling followed strict schedules. Infantry between 0600 08 artillery 0800 to 10 to ambulances 10 to 1200. This temporal segregation prevented chaos of hundreds of trucks simultaneously competing for supplies. The mathematics were unforgiving. Each gallon delivered to front lines required burning 1/3 gallon transporting it. Maintaining 50,000 trucks required producing fuel for 66,066 truck days of consumption. Standard Oil could produce it. Tankers could transport it. French railways could move it inland. But the final 30 miles, from supply dumps to motor pools, represented unprecedented logistical challenge. The solution emerged from circus logistics. Major Thomas Cushing, a former circus manager, recognized fuel distribution resembled moving traveling shows. Everything arriving on schedule, setting up quickly, operating efficiently, packing for the next move. Cushing organized fuel convoys like circus trains. Lead vehicles carried communications and traffic control. Middle vehicles transported fuel, rear vehicles carried spare parts and mechanics. Each convoy operated as self-contained units, establishing complete refueling stations within 30 minutes. During Meuse-Argonne, this system faced ultimate testing. American forces advanced along a 40-kilometer front, pushing Germans back 2 to 8 kilometers daily. Traditional depots couldn't establish fast enough. Instead, fuel convoys leapfrogged. One convoy established refueling and began operations while the next drove past to establish the next point 5 kilometers forward. As the front advanced, rear points shut down and drove forward ahead of current lines. This continuous movement created rolling logistics that Germans couldn't disrupt. Traditional doctrine held that cutting supply lines forced retreats. But American supply lines weren't static targets. They moved constantly, impossible to fix long enough for artillery or air attack. By the time German intelligence identified an American fuel depot, it had already displaced forward. Between September 26th and November 11th, 1918, 47 days, American forces burned 120,000 gallons of gasoline. This fuel moved 1.2 million soldiers, 3,980 artillery pieces, 90,000 tons of ammunition, and 250,000 tons of supplies through some of the most difficult terrain on the Western Front. The fuel distribution network never failed. Not once did an American division halt its advance because trucks ran dry. The greatest challenge wasn't building trucks or roads or fuel systems. It was preventing 50,000 vehicles from creating gridlock that paralyzed an entire army. In September 1918, the American sector contained more motor vehicles than had existed in all of France before the war. These vehicles operated on a road network barely adequate for peacetime civilian traffic. Without ruthless traffic control, the entire motorized logistics system would collapse into immobile chaos. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Pullen of the Military Police Corps understood this problem intimately. He had spent 6 months studying French and British traffic control methods and concluded they were hopelessly inadequate for American operational tempo. The British system relied on military police stationed at major intersections, manually directing traffic. This worked tolerably for small-scale movements, but broke down completely when hundreds of vehicles needed simultaneous routing across dozens of roads. Poland proposed something unprecedented. Treat the road network like a railroad system. Every vehicle would receive movement orders specifying exact routes, departure times, and speeds. Roads would be designated one way during specific hours. Convoys would be scheduled with precision spacing preventing congestion. Intersections would operate on fixed timetables. Northbound traffic from 0600 to 0800, eastbound from U800 to 1000, southbound from 1000 to 1200. This rigid scheduling eliminated discretionary routing decisions that caused bottlenecks. Implementation required creating an entirely new military specialty: traffic regulators. These weren't traditional military police enforcing discipline. They were logistics coordinators managing flow rates, calculating optimal convoy spacing, and rerouting traffic around congestion points. Each traffic regulator controlled a road zone typically 10 to 15 miles long, with authority to halt, divert, or delay any vehicle, regardless of the cargo's priority or the driver's rank. This authority structure inverted traditional military hierarchy. A sergeant traffic regulator could order a colonel to wait while a lower priority convoy cleared an intersection. Pershing backed this system absolutely. His standing order declared that traffic flow took precedence over rank. An officer who disobeyed a traffic regulator's instructions faced immediate relief of command. This wasn't theory. During Meuse-Argonne, 3 colonels and 1 brigadier general were removed from their positions for attempting to circumvent traffic control. The system's complexity was staggering. The AEF Operations Section maintained a master traffic schedule coordinating every significant vehicle movement across the American sector. This schedule resembled a railroad timetable, but vastly more intricate. Railroad traffic moved on fixed tracks. Trains couldn't leave their routes. Road traffic was fluid, with drivers constantly tempted to take shortcuts or alternate routes. The traffic control system had to account for human unpredictability while maintaining strict scheduling. Road signs represented another innovation borrowed from American civilian practice. Before 1918, military road marking was primitive, perhaps a hand-painted arrow at major intersections. The AEF installed comprehensive signage, distance markers every kilometer, directional signs at every intersection, warning signs for curves and steep grades, load limit signs on bridges. This signage system used standardized symbols recognizable to drivers who might not read English. The signs were painted in reflective white paint visible in truck headlights at night. Night operations presented unique challenges. European armies generally avoided major movements after dark. Too much risk of units getting lost or colliding. American doctrine required continuous 24-hour operations. This meant trucks moving in darkness on unfamiliar roads through potentially hostile territory. The solution combined signage, convoy discipline, and restricted lighting. Led vehicles in convoys carried navigation officers with detailed maps and compasses. Following vehicles maintained strict spacing, close enough to keep the lead vehicle's blue-filtered taillights visible, far enough to avoid collision if the lead vehicle stopped suddenly. The traffic control system's true test came during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Between September 25th and September 27th, the AEF executed the largest simultaneous troop movement in American military history. 9 divisions, approximately 220,000 soldiers, had to move into attack positions along a 40-kilometer front, while simultaneously displacing 5 divisions, 10,000 soldiers, from those same positions to reserve areas. This crossing movement required both groups to use the same road network simultaneously, without interfering with ongoing supply operations supporting forces already in combat. The operation required 96 hours of continuous movement. Traffic planners divided the road network into zones, with specific roads designated for specific purposes during specific hours. One road might carry troops northbound from 400 to 1200, then switch to southbound supply convoys from 1200 to 2000, then become an empty route for maintenance from 2000 to 0400. Vehicles that arrived early at zone boundaries waited in designated staging areas until their scheduled movement window opened. The precision was surgical. American units moved into position exactly on schedule. Artillery battalions arriving at their firing points within 30-minute windows. Ammunition trucks appearing at battery positions exactly when needed. German commanders who later provided testimony after the war noted that American attacks began with a punctuality that seemed almost mechanical. Artillery barrages starting at precise scheduled times. Infantry waves emerging from trenches within minutes of planned H hours. This punctuality wasn't coincidence. It was the direct result of traffic control systems ensuring every unit arrived when and where operational plans specified. On September 26, 1918, at 0525 hours, 700 American artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously along a 40-kilometer front. The Meuse-Argonne offensive had begun, the largest American military operation in history. Behind the guns, the real battle was already underway. A logistical struggle to sustain 600,000 soldiers advancing through some of the most defensible terrain on the Western Front. The Germans held every advantage terrain could provide. The Argonne forest was a defender's paradise. Dense woods, steep ravines, pre-positioned fortifications. The Kriemhilde-Stellung, the main German defensive line, had been constructed over 3 years and was considered impregnable. Behind these defenses, German logistics ran on rail lines hardened against artillery and operated by crews with 4 years of practice. American supply lines, by contrast, depended entirely on roads that would be under artillery fire and motor transport systems that had never been tested at this scale. German commanders expected American logistics to collapse within a week. Their calculations were sound. An advancing army of 600,000 men required approximately 750 tons of supplies daily per division. Multiplied across 22 divisions equaled 16,500 tons daily. Adding artillery ammunition consumption during active combat doubled that figure to 33,000 tons. The only roads into the American sector ran through narrow valleys that German artillery could interdict easily. Once American trucks started burning on those roads, the offensive would stall. What the Germans didn't understand was that American logistics weren't built on single supply routes vulnerable to disruption. The road network the AEF had constructed provided redundancy impossible with railroads. When German artillery made one road impassable, traffic rerouted to parallel roads within hours. When bridges were destroyed, engineer companies threw up temporary spans using prefabricated components carried on specially designed trucks. When traffic congestion developed, traffic controllers diverted convoys to alternate routes selected from dozens of possibilities. The offensive's first 4 days exceeded all expectations. American forces advanced 8 kilometers, capturing the first German defensive line and pushing toward the Kriemhilde-Stellung. But this success created a logistical nightmare. Supply trucks that had planned to travel 15 kilometers to forward depots now had to cover 23 kilometers, with the last 8 kilometers under direct German observation and artillery fire. Fuel consumption doubled as trucks navigated destroyed roads and steep grades. Vehicle breakdowns spiked as transmissions and suspensions failed under constant strain. By September 30th, the system was nearing breaking point. Mechanical breakdowns had idled 4 through 200 trucks, nearly 10% of the operational fleet. Road damage from 4 days of continuous heavy traffic had reduced average convoy speeds to 6 miles per hour. German counter-battery fire had destroyed 17 fuel trucks and 2 ammunition convoys. Division commanders reported ammunition stocks falling to 40% of normal levels. If the logistical situation didn't improve within 72 hours, the offensive would have to pause. The Motor Transport Corps responded with a surge effort that demonstrated the flexibility motorized logistics provided. Every available mechanic was redirected to forward repair stations. Parts were cannibalized from the most heavily damaged trucks to repair less damaged vehicles. Civilian trucks held in reserve at base areas were rushed forward as replacements. Road construction companies abandoned scheduled maintenance projects and concentrated entirely on repairing the 3 main supply routes. Most critically, traffic controllers implemented emergency procedures allowing convoys to travel on roads simultaneously in both directions by dividing roads down the center line. Northbound traffic on the right, southbound on the left. This improvisation would have been suicidal on civilian roads. On military roads with disciplined drivers following strict orders, it doubled road capacity overnight. The technique required convoys to slow to walking pace and maintain exact spacing. But it worked. Between October 1st and October 3rd, while maintaining this dangerous doubled-up traffic pattern, American trucks moved 42,000 tons of supplies forward and evacuated 18,000 wounded soldiers rearward on the same roads simultaneously. By October 4th, the crisis had passed. Sufficient trucks were back in operation, roads were adequately repaired, and ammunition stocks had been replenished. The offensive resumed on October 14th with artillery barrages that consumed 100,000 shells in 6 hours. A rate of fire possible only because truck convoys had stockpiled 48 hours' worth of ammunition at battery positions before the attack began. The final German defensive line broke on October 31st. American units advanced 12 kilometers in 4 days, the fastest sustained advance by any Allied army in 1918. German forces retreated in disorder, abandoning equipment and supplies. Post-war German military analyses cited logistical collapse as the primary cause of this disintegration. While American trucks delivered continuous supplies forward, German horse-drawn wagons and overloaded railways couldn't keep pace with retreating units. German divisions that began the withdrawal with full equipment arrived at rear areas with barely half their artillery and less than 20% of their support vehicles. When the armistice took effect on November 11, 1918, American motor vehicles had traveled 176,000 miles in combat operations, equivalent to 7,040 circuits of the Earth. They had transported 8,400,000 tons of supplies, evacuated 1,200,000 wounded soldiers, and moved entire divisions across hundreds of kilometers in operations that would have required months using traditional logistics. German General Erich Ludendorff, in his post-war memoirs, identified American motorized logistics as one of the decisive factors in Germany's defeat. He noted that German forces in 1918 remained dependent on 400,000 horses that required more feed than Germany could provide, and on railway networks that Allied air forces could disrupt. American trucks, by contrast, operated independently of fixed infrastructure and consumed fuel that America produced in unlimited quantities. This asymmetry, Ludendorff wrote, meant that as the war progressed, American offensive capability increased while German defensive capability deteriorated. French Marshal Ferdinand Foch, Supreme Allied Commander, was more direct in his assessment. He stated that the American contribution to victory wasn't primarily the troops they brought, though those were significant. It was the demonstration that modern industrial warfare could be sustained using automotive transport independent of railways. This revelation, Foch noted, would transform how all future wars would be fought. The implications extended far beyond the Western Front. The AEF's success with motorized logistics proved that armies could operate in regions without developed rail infrastructure. This made motorized forces inherently more flexible and strategically unpredictable than rail-dependent forces. An army tied to railways telegraphed its intentions. You could predict where it would attack by observing where it concentrated rail traffic. An army on trucks could shift operational focus rapidly, massing forces where enemy intelligence didn't expect them. The cost of this revolution was substantial. The Motor Transport Corps suffered 4,048 soldiers killed, more casualties than many infantry regiments. These deaths came not from enemy action, but from vehicular accidents, mechanical failures, and exhaustion. Drivers worked 20-hour shifts during peak operations, operating vehicles with minimal safety equipment on damaged roads in darkness. The mortality rate per mile driven exceeded peacetime civilian rates by a factor of 40. But the capability this sacrifice purchased was unprecedented. By November 1918, the United States possessed institutional knowledge of motorized military logistics that no other nation could match. American officers understood how to calculate road capacity, design traffic control systems, organize maintenance networks, and sustain fuel distribution across continental distances. This expertise represented a strategic asset that would influence American military doctrine for the next century. The Liberty truck itself became obsolete within 5 years. Post-war models with better engines, stronger transmissions, and improved suspensions replaced the wartime design. But the fundamental principle that automotive transport could sustain armies independent of fixed infrastructure had been proven beyond question. When the next war came, every major military power would field motorized logistics. But America had learned the lessons first, paid the price to develop the systems, and establish the doctrines that others would copy. In the spring of 1919, as the AEF prepared to return home, the French government requested that America leave behind its road network and traffic control systems. These, French officials argued, represented a permanent improvement to French infrastructure worth more than monetary payment. Pershing agreed. The roads the AEF built remained in service for decades, many eventually becoming routes nationales that still carry traffic today. They stand as monuments to the moment when America brought its industrial revolution to Europe's battlefields and proved that wheels could defeat rails, that gasoline could trump hay, and that the mathematics of mass production could be weaponized as effectively as artillery.